The room was plunged into a heavy gloom, illuminated only by pale beams of light that escaped through the thick curtains. The atmosphere was charged with silent tension. Whispers echoed like cold winds through the marble corridors. In the center of that somber scene, sitting in an ordinary chair, was a man with a serene expression and simple clothes, Ibrahim Traoré. No one there seemed to pay him any attention. To the eyes of those around him, he was nothing more than another young soldier lost among powerful figures. The sound of heavy footsteps interrupted the silence as high-ranking military officers crossed the room, greeting only their peers. Ibrahim kept his head down, his eyes attentive, silently observing every gesture, every word filled with arrogance that circulated in the room. His calm expression hid the weight of a gigantic responsibility, still invisible to most of the people there. He was a stranger among those who considered themselves masters of the nation's destiny. The smell of old leather and gunpowder filled the air, while hushed conversations revolved around power, contracts, and hidden alliances. Yet there he was, as discreet as a shadow, as solid as a rock. He needed no introduction, no loud titles. Ibrahim Traoré carried with him a quiet strength, the kind of strength that only reveals itself when the world tries to underestimate it. And tonight, he was about to be put to the test. A high-ranking general, draped in glittering medals and an air of superiority, strode across the room with long, arrogant strides. His eyes scanned the room like someone sizing up merchandise in a marketplace. As he passed Ibrahim, he gave him a disdainful look, as if he saw only an insignificant soldier. Without hesitation, his voice thick with contempt, the general muttered to an aide at his side, "These peasants think they can understand the game of the big guys." The sentence, spoken deliberately loudly, cut through the air like a cold blade. The aide, trying to please, let out a forced laugh. Other officers nearby also smiled in a silent stream of mockery. Ibrahim, motionless in his posture, only slowly raised his eyes to look at the general, without uttering a single word. His gaze, firm and deep, was like a mirror, returning all the arrogance he received, but without the need for cheap provocations. In the corner of the room, a foreign businessman, dressed in an expensive suit and wearing intense perfumes, approached, discreetly handing the general a leather briefcase. Inside it, dirty proposals and promises of wealth for whoever was willing to sell the soul of the country. The general, without any shame, opened the briefcase in front of everyone, as if he had already decided to betray his own land. Ibrahim, silent, witnessed the scene. He was still considered just a spectator, but that was about to change. The general, now sure of his position, addressed Ibrahim directly with a sarcastic smile. "And you, boy? Have you thought about a better future?" he asked, waving the briefcase full of bribes in front of him. "With what we offer you here, you can forget this nonsense about fighting for your country." Each word was laced with venom, as if the simple concept of loyalty were an old-fashioned joke compared to the empty numbers and promises. For a moment, the room stopped. A few officers glanced discreetly at Ibrahim, as if expecting a submissive response, perhaps a shy smile or a nervous acceptance. This was the fate many had chosen, to bow down to money, to sell hope in exchange for immediate comfort. The silence hung thick, like the prelude to a storm. Ibrahim, however, did not respond. Immediately, He rose slowly from his chair, his movements controlled and firm, as if carrying the weight of centuries of struggle on his shoulders. His gaze met the general's, a gaze that did not ask permission, that did not beg for recognition. It was the look of someone who knew exactly who he was, even if others were still blinded by their own arrogance. Before the general could press further, a sharp sound echoed through the corridors, boots marching in unison, firm voices giving quick orders. The double doors of the room burst open, revealing a retinue of elite soldiers, uniformed and armed, surrounding the room with surgical precision. In the center of the group, a high-ranking officer raised his voice imposingly. "Present. Yourselves out of respect to the President of Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré." The room froze. The laughter died on the officer's lips. The foreign businessman dropped the briefcase from his hands, scattering compromising documents across the floor. The general, pale as a ghost, instinctively took a step back, as if the ground beneath his feet had disappeared. In seconds, the atmosphere changed. Where before there had been contempt and arrogance, there was now only astonishment, fear, and regret. Ibrahim, calm and imposing, walked to the center of the room. Each step he took seemed to weigh tons. Without changing his tone of voice, without needing to shout or get excited, he calmly said, "It is not gold or power that will save our country. It is dignity. It is the courage not to sell out even when the price seems high." His words pierced the hearts of those present like well-aimed arrows. No response was possible. Only silence, heavy, humiliating, and eternal. The general, who minutes before had been flaunting arrogance, could now barely hold his gaze. His body seemed smaller, crushed by public shame. He tried to stammer out an apology, but the words died in his throat, muffled by the moral strength emanating from Ibrahim. The foreign businessman, in turn, hurriedly picked up the papers scattered on the floor, sweating coldly, as if trying to erase the evidence of his own crime. Other officers, previously smiling, now avoided looking at Traoré, staring into space like children caught in a shameful prank. Some nervously adjusted their uniforms, trying to compose themselves. Others simply hung their heads in silence, unable to face the greatness they had tried to diminish. The humiliation did not come from shouting or punishments. It came from their own conscience, overwhelming and inescapable. The atmosphere, which had previously been teeming with false superiority, became a tomb of shattered egos. The lesson was clear. Respect is not demanded by force, but by dignity. And in that moment, each of those present knew that they had witnessed something they would never forget. Blind pride and corruption had been exposed and defeated, not by weapons, but by the unshakable force of honor. Ibrahim Traoré stood in the center of the hall, in complete silence. There was no need for long speeches or humiliating punishments. His presence, his unshakable calm, and his firmness had said it all. He looked at each face present, as if he were marking an eternal memory in the hearts of those who had underestimated him. His silence was more eloquent than any shout. It was dignity asserting itself without needing to explain itself. With a simple gesture, a slight nod, Ibrahim signaled to his men. Immediately, the documents scattered on the floor were collected as evidence. The foreign businessman was escorted out of the room without fanfare, without the need for public humiliation. The general, for his part, remained where he was, like a statue of petrified shame. Traoré's justice was not cruel. It was fair, serene, and implacable in its nobility. Instead of punishing with hatred, Ibrahim punished by example. He showed that true leadership is built in silence, in actions, in posture. He proved without needing a single additional word that the true strength of a leader lies in the ability to hold one's head high, even when it would be easier to give in to the impulse for revenge. And it was this silent strength that day left the world in shock. Before leaving the hall, Ibrahim Traoré made a point of leaving one last message, not to humiliate, but to teach. With a firm and controlled voice, he said, "Betraying one's own land is like poisoning one's own blood. Those who do not respect their homeland end up condemned to wander without honor, even if they are surrounded by gold." His words echoed throughout the empty hall, penetrating deep into hearts already wounded by shame. The general, the businessman, the officers, everyone listened in absolute silence. There was no way to refute such a harsh truth. There was no argument that could justify greed that for a moment seemed more important than dignity. The lesson was hard, but necessary. Africa would no longer be sold like a piece of cheap merchandise. It was time to awaken a new consciousness, to rebuild with pride and courage. Ibrahim left the place as he had arrived, with firm, discreet steps, but charged with power. Behind him, a hall that would never be the same. He did not just carry the title of president, he carried the spirit of an entire continent crying out for rebirth. His actions not only shocked the world that day, they planted the seeds of a new future where honor would no longer be negotiable. As the sun began to set over the capital, painting the sky with shades of gold and red, Ibrahim Traoré gazed serenely. At the horizon, the battle he had fought in that hall was invisible to most, but crucial to the fate of his nation. It was a silent war against corruption, against submission, against the loss of self-worth. And he knew that the true victory would not be celebrated in applause, but in the profound changes that would begin to germinate from then on. Every step he took outside the building echoed like a proclamation. Africa was not for sale. No longer would its people be seen as disposable pawns in power games. Traoré walked not only as a political leader, but as a living symbol of a new era, a time where dignity trumps money, and where the courage to resist writes the future. In the background, the narration would end with a powerful, solemn, and hopeful phrase: "Respecting one's own land is the first victory of a people." And today, more than ever, Africa is rising from the ashes, guided by those who refuse to kneel. The video would end with the image of Ibrahim from behind, marching towards the sunset, while the soft and epic background music slowly rises.